something that you might occasionally see when you have created an animation and you're trying to save it. Right? You say cannot open file. Well, there's a typo here, but that's not what I'm referring to. What the problem is that sometimes it cannot save it, but it doesn't tell you why. So it's opening it not to read it. This is an attempt to save it, and if you can play it, right, you should be able to also save it. Now, in most cases you can, maybe you can save it as an image sequence. That will probably still work. You can also save it as its own native format. So that's a DWA file. And let's say you want to have something like, there, give it a new name, something unique. DWA Dogwaffle animation, that will work, and it's a quick memory dump. It should go really fast, especially if you have an SSD drive. So you have the ability to save it, but why is it not saving it to mp4 or WMV? Right? If you go to export media, I mean, you can try AVI. There's some codecs that are still worth using in that format, but also export media, you have this option, and you can say, okay, I need a little bit more on the bit rate. Let's say 12 million. And then you go with mp4 or some of the WMVs, and you know it should be able to replace it if it's an existing file, or you just give it a fake whatever name here, and it's still failing. Why is that? Well, one of the most common reasons is that the video format that you're trying to shoot for here doesn't support the resolution. And I'm talking about the resolution or dimensions of the video, right? If this is something like a standard even number, multiple of 8, multiple of 16, or something like that, like say 512 pixels by 1024 or something like that, 768 by, you name it, 480. These are numbers you hear a lot, right? And you see them here when you go to create something new. You'll see these dimensions, 600 by 400, you'll see 768 by 432, 1280 by 720, the half HD, and the full HD, 1920 by 1080. So these dimensions are easily supported by those different video formats. But what happens if you have a different? So let's say I'm loading this one here, which I had stored on disk. It's not lost. I can store it on disk. I can save it. I can restore it. It's all good. But I cannot seem to save it. If I go to export, something like this, and say I need 12 megabit per second target bitrate, why is it refusing to save it? Most likely, the reason is that your dimensions on that frame is not standard, is not supported, right? And it's easily so if you did some sort of manipulation, like selecting, like a rectangular selection, and then cropping to it. Let's say you did something like this here. You have a marching ants, but you did this visually, and you didn't check what is the dimension if you crop to that. And that's exactly what I did in this case. This dimension here, this video is probably showing dimensions that are not multiples of 2, not even numbers. And in fact, some videos even need better. They need multiple of 4, multiple of 8. Right? So go to the image, image info, and there you can see the width is fine, 800, that should be okay, but the height is 535, and that's a no-no for most video codecs. Most video compressions want that to be maybe a 436, 536, or 534, or 532, or something like that. So what can you do about it? Well, you just resample it. Right? If you have to save it to a format that wants that other slight change, and let's take a look at this one. Same thing here. This one was, I think, even worse. If I look at image info, yeah, both dimensions, the width and the height, are odd numbers. That's a big no-no in video. So most video codecs will require that to be an even number. Better yet, sometimes a multiple of 4, multiple of 8, 16. Some codecs really require very high multiples, like 32 pixels minimum, and then 64, 128, 96, 128, etc. So that's quite easily fixed, though. You can resample it. And when you resample it, you could lock the two so that they are together. And as you change, for example, 575, you want 576. But that's too big. Hold on a second. 576. There you go. Now you have 852. That's very likely going to be supported. Now it might be better to go with 856. So if you change that one is still probably okay. I think I'm going to stay with this, and you can decide at this point if you notice the difference with just 1 pixel more on the width, right? Probably not. And so the question then is, well, how good is it if you resample it? Well, that depends on what you do here. Nearest neighbor is going to be the least in the quality, but the fastest. If you want the really very best, you do bicubic plus, and let it rip. And you won't have time to go for coffee. It's going to go pretty fast, right? So, well, that of course depends on how big your dimensions are and how many frames there are. But here it took just 5 seconds or so, and it's now in a dimension in the space. If you look under the image info, 576 by 852, I bet you can save that. Let's go back to animation. Let's go to export media and select what we wanted there for the bitrate. I always recommend something in the double-digit millions, even if you don't need it. Well, no, not really. Sometimes you really want it smaller. But here is the file, and save it. And there we go. Now it saves it. All right, so it's just a matter, very likely, if you have this scenario where it's not saving to the WMV or the mp4, but it is saving to most other formats, especially the native DWA. That one is actually more powerful. The DWA can actually save in with odd dimensions also. And sometimes you might say, well, that's misleading, right? Because you won't be able to use it as is in something else. Well, you don't have to use something else. No, of course you do. Just kidding. But here's this. Let's do this one more time. This one has about 900 frames, I think, or no, even more, 1233 frames, or 34, because it starts at 0. Frame 0 up here. And when you go to the last one, 1233. And I don't know if we have a place other than that to tell us how many frames there are. There is some info on the current frame here, but I don't think that it says which frame number it has altogether in the video. We see the image. On this current frame, we have the image info. Yep, sure enough, the height is no good, 530. Let's make that 532 or 536. So I'm going to go and resample that too. Let's go resample, and you could actually do an image size, simply adding 1 pixel or 2-3 pixels on the bottom. They would be black or whatever the background color is, the secondary color. But it's probably just as good to say, well, it's just 800 by, make sure you lock the two, actually no, you unlock that. At this point I want to just change the vertical dimension without affecting the horizontal, because if I keep it locked, if I change this to 6, it might change the width to an unacceptable odd number. So I want to keep it unlocked so that as I'm changing this, let's say I'm going to 532, it's only changing that. I'm going to go to 536. That's the nearest that I think is going to be useful and acceptable for the mp4 format or for WMV. And again, we'll use, you know what, this is probably not something I'll notice a difference between linear plus and cubic plus. I'm not sure what to look for in terms of differences. So I'm going to just keep it as is. Bilinear plus is a little bit faster, and okay, so that's now allocating the memory, and with any luck, not going to crash. And there you go. Freeing the memory of the old, allocating the memory for the new, taking all the frames, and probably did a dump in between to save it on disk. I'm not exactly sure all the different things we do here to make sure that we can now resample and save the new size of each frame in the new animation. And so that one takes a little bit longer. It's 1300 frames, roughly 1200 something, and not super big ones. This is not full HD or 4K. It's really a little bit more on the lower end, but same concept. And you might have a clip that shows the same challenge if you manually selected a portion that you want to crop to and then didn't check the dimensions. And there may even be a bug somewhere. I think if we do the selection to crop, or rather the crop tool, the dimensions you see is actually, I think it's actually off by 1 pixel. So always verify. Don't trust what you see. Always verify, and keep this in mind. If you do have a problem saving a video that otherwise plays fine and also saves as a DWA, do that test so that you can say, well, yeah, there's definitely something working on saving. You could test it with saving it as an image sequence, if that's a format you can also live with. And possibly, as I said, possibly saving it as AVI, that would be also an option to then be careful with the AVI though. Make sure you understand the codecs and use the one that will not lose the information that you're trying to retain in that video, like some color depth, or some codecs are for grayscale only, others are okay but only have 2 bits of red, and some others will go only up to a certain dimension, and so there are some codecs that I use in AVI, but more and more you see either you work with image sequence like PNG lossless, and or something like mp4 if you don't care about the lossy nature of it, and you just give it super high bit rate so that it probably doesn't show you anything as a loss, nothing visible anyway. So here it is now, the newly resized, and let's go check the image info. Yep, 800 by 536. That should be possible to save. Let's see. Let's go to export media, and let's keep it as what is it? I usually give it about 12 megabit per second, and we'll give it a different file name here. Instead of a 1, we'll make it number 2. And there it is. Now it saves, right? Whereas before it failed because the dimensions on the vertical, in this particular case, vertical axis, or Y dimensions, the height of the image frame was an odd number, and like I said, that's a big no-no. So you can work with it, but when you try to save it to a format, that format has its requirements. So make sure that you save it to dimensions that are actually compatible with the format. Alright, thanks for watching. I hope this was useful. See you next time.